We need to take into account when we look at letters or other things from antiquity. I mean, this could also apply to some extent, ancient philosophers and other sages, but here all the more for those of us who are Christians who hear the Bible as God's Word. We want to distinguish between moral issues and what are just cultural issues. Sometimes we have transcultural moral norms. For instance, Paul has vice lists in Romans 1, 28 to 31, 1 Corinthians 6, 9 and 10, Galatians 5, 19 to 21. These are things that are pretty much condemned across the board, and he condemns them regularly, many of them in his letters: sexual sins, slander and gossip, and greed, and so on. Transcultural moral norms. Now, when I say that some things reflect a particular cultural situation, I'm not saying that things in the Bible are not for all time. I'm just saying that not all things in the Bible are for all circumstances. If we want to apply them rightly, we need to make sure we apply them to analogous circumstances. And so it's important to look at the culture, to see what the transcultural norms are, and also to see how he applies them concretely so we can reapply them concretely in different cultural settings. Paul didn't tell us what to do about nuclear weapons. Paul didn't he didn't address some very crucial ethical issues today. The Didache speaks about abortion, but Paul doesn't specifically name it in his letters. It seems kind of surprising that he doesn't, but there are issues today we want to address. We have to look for the principles in these letters. Well, you have transcultural moral norms, but chances are it's not transcultural if Paul allows different practices in different passages. And for the whole Bible, for biblical theology, if we have different passages that allow different practices. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 14, women are secluded in the home, and that was considered the appropriate role for matrons in Ephesus, where Paul was, where 1 Timothy is addressing in 1 Timothy 5:14. Women working outside the home. Well, we have that in Proverbs 31:16, Genesis 29:9, Song of Solomon 1:6. It's a different culture. I would also apply that to some other gender issues, like comparing 1 Timothy 2:12 with Judges 4:4 and so on. Not everybody agrees with me on that. There's a lot of difference of opinion on how we apply cultural background in certain details. But on most issues in Romans, we'll find a consensus. There will be some issues where there are some major debates going on today, and I will at least try to make those known to you. One of those, we need to understand the cultural options available to the writer. For example, if they wrote in an era when nobody was trying to abolish all of slavery, that they don't explicitly address an issue that nobody was raising doesn't mean that they would have sided with slavery supporters if somebody had raised the issue. I think I can make a pretty strong argument from Ephesians that the abolitionists who were against slavery were understanding the spirit of Paul a whole lot more correctly than those who were trying to use Paul in support of slavery. He addresses a situation that exists, but in terms of what he thought should have existed, when he speaks of you masters do the same things to them, Ephesians 6:9, and says, we have the same master in heaven. Well, I think that kind of suggests that Paul was more radical than most of his contemporaries, and I've argued that in print elsewhere, but many different things are controversial. Not only that, but even the authorship of Ephesians, although I agree with those who argue that it's Pauline. But by contrast, while you have different things in different parts of the Bible that seem to point in different directions, suggesting that cultural issues are at play, the Bible sometimes speaks with a unanimous voice against some elements of culture. Greeks in Paul's day held various views regarding premarital sex and homosexual intercourse. But the Bible condemns all sexual intercourse outside of heterosexual marriage in every passage that mentions them. That suggests that it's something that reflects all of biblical theology rather than merely a particular cultural situation. that, like everything else, is debated by some people. So I'll explore some of that in more detail, but this is the direction that I believe that it does point.